definitely out next week. Stay tuned if Sam decides to stay an extra couple days out west, but we'll probably be back the week after. Also, some people, it's great to know that people are watching the recordings, and also really sorry that the server is down right now and nothing is up on that external site, but everything is up on our internal Microsoft Teams site. So if you don't know how to access that, send me an email, Clare_Maffei at fishandwildlifefws.gov. And I can walk you through that. So not sure when that's going to be up, but probably in a week or two, I think.
Claire, do you have a sense of whether random people are finding that site, the Dan's site, or do we need to make that more obvious out on the web? Or is it mostly just like the people who've been attending are pulling it down because it's convenient?
I don't know no, actually, I think it's random people because I keep adding these people to the email list.
Okay.
Which means that they've never been invited to the team or anything. So that's nifty. And yeah, it might be time for another blast, maybe in September when we have the Bumblebee people visiting. So that's the other thing. We've actually started lining up Bumblebee people for September and beyond, which is yay. Stay tuned. Okay. Yep. Sam, it's all you.
All right. So we're going to continue. This may or may not be the last of the females, but we'll be pretty close. And Mike is away. He's teaching a class right now, so he won't join us. And we left off, if you want to open up the Megachile of the the tallgrass prairie that Mike put together. We finished last time the species of Megachile that had black scopal hairs. And now we're moving on to the sections just below that. And I'm going to share my screen so you can also look here, and you can open up the Megachile female guide on Discover Life, and you can use the Has button to see some of the other alternative or complementary, I would say, scorings and verbiage about separating some of these groups. So I will share and screen. Okay, so you should see Mike's guide again, right? I'll take that as an affirmative. And so we left off here.
That's
so he had, okay, thanks, Claire. So we have a split here, and basically now we're going to look back down on T6. So there's a lot of action in Megachile on T6 and S6. So right now we're looking at, in Mike's guide, a T6 split. So we're looking at the hair length. So the first part that will take us down to 27 here is all the hairs on T6 are essentially really short, and they're not projecting up, and they're not any longer than T5. In fact, they're usually, the hairs on T5 is usually a lot shorter. I'll show you an example of that with intermis here, which we're going to discuss. And then the alternative is that you also have long hairs on T6 that are similar in length to T5, and we'll see a number of examples of that one. So going to the first specimen is intermis. I'm going to...
Before you do so, I'm going to interrupt you. One of our participants has their hand raised, and I'd like to invite them to ask that question.
Yep. Not hearing anything.
Yeah, hold on.
Okay.
I don't know if I dismantled chat. And now the hand is not raised anymore. Oh, Robert, you can unmute. Okay. I'm gonna take it that maybe that was an accident, or Robert, please put your question in the chat.
Okay. All right. So we'll talk about intermis, which is a really large Megachile, one of the largest ones. It's more northern in Maryland. Here in the Mid-Atlantic, we don't see it except in Garrett County up on the plateau in the Appalachians. Again, you can go on to Discover Life and type in either into the the box that shows up at the home page, the name of each of these species, and go see the map. Or you can go to the global mapper, which is a link at the top of Discover Life, and open up the map to see these distributions, and then type in the name of the species that you want to investigate. So this is big northern, and I'm going to now go to here. Let's see, Control-Alt F to see the full range, and we're looking at T6 here, and you can see that all the hairs are relatively short. Here's T5 with longer hairs, but they're oppressed, they're short, and they fit Mike's definition for this particular group and the split there. The species itself, in addition to being big, has very wide cheeks. So it's just a sort of chunky-headed species. And then we're going to look at a couple features. This also is a species that shows up a lot in hole nests if you're in the northern part. So relatively wide and smooth cheeks there. And then if we flip this over, we're going to take a look at the mandible and the clipial rim. Often the rim of the clipius in Megachile have things going on like bumps, and mostly we would call them denticules, or I might maybe mispronouncing it, but there are small projections along the rim, or sometimes there's none, and that helps separate things out. Theoretically, I don't know if this is a good specimen to see things in. Theoretically, we will have 5 teeth on the mandible. The mandible tooth pattern isn't showing up well in this particular shot. I might change the lighting a little bit to see if we can get that in better view. See what happens when I turn off the overhead light. It becomes very dark. I think it's insufficient to detect the number of teeth, starting with the first tooth there. The rim of the mandible, you can see, I'll point it out because it's a little bit hidden by hair. So here's an undulation, so it's not straight across. Here's an undulation, here's a dip, there's a central small area and another undulation there. So let's see what how Mike describes that in his key. So with 2 small lateral lobate, so like lobes rather than teeth, so you saw how rounded they were, processes, and a medial process that is somewhat bidentate. That I did not note. So bidentate, so somewhat two-toothed, so it sounds subtle. Mandible with 5 teeth, S6 hairs, all pale. We'll take a quick look at that, as you almost always do. And then large, 15 millimeters is quite big. So let's take a, go back here to this. So I might play a little bit with shifting this to a different position and seeing if the central bump becomes clearer. It doesn't look like, in particular, that, you know, turn my thing down. So it's a little bit hard to see. So here's these lobes on either side of the rim, and then this might be what they're talking about. The hairs are definitely in the way of seeing much of what's going on, and we can't really count the teeth, but there's probably a recessed area here, 2 teeth on the end, and then 3 towards the tip. So that is intermiss. Also, we have relatively closely spaced ocelli compared to the distance to the back of the head on that one. All right, let me reposition here, go back to the guide, and we get into a series of specimens. So the obverse of intermiss is the cheeks are narrower, not as wide or less wide than the width of the eye in the lateral view. So you look at it from the side, and the clipial margin entire or with just a small tooth denticule at the middle, and 4 teeth, S6 start. So I guess we'll show the fact that the S6 on the underside is pale colored here, just to be complete. And it's pretty obvious. It also has very orange hairs, which is also not mentioned a lot, but a lot of times you'll use, oh, it's orange haired rather than white haired. Oops. So that helps eliminate a lot of different things down there. But you see, this is all light colored, no dark colored hairs. All right, going back to the guide. These two, Deflexa is extremely rare. I have none in my collection, so I'm not going to talk about that one, largely because I can't recall much about it. It's probably, I think it might be a P specialist too. Dakotaensis is too far to the west for my collection, so I don't have any of those. And if we then go down a little bit further, we get to the uber common mendica. So mendica is in the east and probably in Mike's area in the central states, in most areas too. And I'm sure if I did a calculation, we would find that mendica is the most commonly collected Megachile in the east, at least within my experience. So it's similar, but it's going to have that narrower cheek compared to intermiss, and it's going to have. We'll just show this, and this is part of the character string that I use when I'm looking at mendicas. So if it was big, its intermiss is so big that you just notice it. If we go back here, take it down to small size and get this in here. So a vibe level for mendica is T6, just almost entirely flat when looked at laterally. So in brevis and lots of other species, it's quite concave. And then in a lot of the parallel-sided species of megs, it's humped, it's convex humped down, and then there's a little lip. This is just straight down to the rim where the sting is coming out. Additionally, the scopal hairs are orange, but not the S6, not near the tip. So if we'll look at this, S6 at the base is orange, has orange hairs, and then the remainder of the S6 segment has dark hairs, and there's no central bare spot in there at all. So it's just a fringe of orange hairs, and that alone can identify the species. If we zoom in a little bit, and you'll see so many of these. So if we zoom in a little bit, we'll see that the presence of what Mike was talking about here, which is that this segment here has almost entirely very short hairs. I think these longer hairs are actually T5, which is bending over and you're seeing the hairs coming out. But the contrast between the two is pretty stark. When we look at the mandible, which we don't really need to do here, it's got 4 teeth, and it is with a couple cutting teeth, and a sort of standard toothiness for a meg. We're going to go now to the underside and just take a look at S6 a bit more. And we can see, so there is some overlap here with the rim of T5, which we're looking across and down on. This is the targeted place, which is T6. You can see hairs throughout. There's no central bare spot. Usually these hairs are different. The apical fringe are shorter and obviously of a different kind of texture, let's call it. And then the internal and basal hairs are longer and not as tightly packed as this fringe. So a lot of times the fringe will be one color, the interior will be different, or the fringe is one color, the interior has no hairs, and then the base might be a separate color too. In this case, there are hairs throughout the S6 fringe to the base are covered. There's no bare spots. And then there's a fringe, really difficult to determine here, but obvious enough that I'm not going to spend more time repositioning that. On T6 itself, these orange hairs run across the base and then very quickly transition to black hairs. And you almost never see any variation in there. And that in itself is almost distinctive enough to use as a identification tool. Let's see what Mike says about that here under mendica. T5 depressed only laterally. And why is it depressed laterally? Oh, he's contrasting with decodensis. So I guess we started up here. So lateral ocelli. So this is primarily a character to separate these two. Decodensis, I just don't know enough about to make that applicable. Yeah, I don't think there's anything we didn't really cover here. So we'll go on. And now we're, so we've left the land of short hairs on T6, and now we're moving into the land of long hairs on T6. And he, at the start of that split, I put this mendica away so I don't get confused. Move that box off the platform. So here we have the split of T6 in profile concave or depressed, and T6 in profile straight. So we saw in mendica a straight profile, and in T6 we'll see, like in brevis, for example, this as concave. So we'll start with where he starts, which is moving to 31 here, which is the profile is concave. And then he has another split, and we're talking about the T3 through 5 margins, and this is separating out addenda and texana from brevis and a couple other species. So texana and addenda have a, well, I'm going to show it. So let me just jump to addenda here. That's first. Addenda is a little bit larger than texana, and they both have this characteristic ridge. It's not quite a ridge. It's a, Mike, I think, put it well, which is a narrowly convex medially area that runs just behind the rim. So it's raised, whereas the other species we're going to see are largely flat in view. Okay, so these latter segments, get it up a little bit more.
Who's this on board? Addenda?
Sorry?
Is this addenda?
This is addenda, yep. So here is addenda. First of all, note, these are the long hairs, so they're no longer short. They're as long as T5. We have not a straight line from the base to the tip or the rim, but a depressed or concave surface. And then when we look, and it's a dark segment, so this makes it a little tricky to see well here online, but here's the rim here, and there is this area right here is just behind the rim, and it's elevated, so it's humped and it runs parallel to the rim down there. And in other words, this whole segment is not flat. So in others, you'll see that this runs reasonably flat. So now what we have is just those two species, texana and addenda. Addenda is a little bit bigger. Additionally, if we go up here, I don't think this is in Mike's key, but this is one that we use. If we go up here to T2, you can see in T2, we have a bunch of long white hair and on T2 that is addition to the white fascia that runs across the segment. We have a bunch of hair that's white, and in texana, this is all black. So that's one way. We'll look at the mandibles. There's a subtle mandible difference, but I more and more come to not rely on that one. Additionally, compared to texana, in texana, there's usually a few white hairs intermixed on T6 in the lower part, not the long ones. The long ones are in both species entirely black. But in texana, there's some white ones scattered in there. Let's see what Mike says about the differences. Both are relatively uncommon, but they can show up in small groups. And so for a particular collection event, you might end up collecting several. So, oh, he talks about the clypeus margins. Yes. All right, let's take a look at that. In addenda, there are, he calls it, the margin is denticulate. So toothed would be another way to talk about this. So let me flip this and move it into view. Nicely, and we'll also see the tooth thing, which I don't think he emphasizes, but he might. There's long hair here involved. Let's see if I can just bring that up high, and you might be able to see some of the small knobs, like there's a knob sticking out. And if we were to do the usual thing, which is holding this in our hands, we'd see that there are these little small knobs or teeth sticking out. Denticulate is just like small toothy things. So it's not completely flat across. Hard to see because there's a lot of hair there. A character that I believe Mitchell, who was a Megachile specialist, after all, and wrote the Bees of Eastern United States in the late 50s and published in 1960, I think. The addenda, so if we're looking at the cutting edge, I want to make that more at a flat to our view. If we look at this last cutting edge, it doesn't matter, it should be symmetrical. And we look at this shape, the point of greatest depth is not at the center, but towards the base, so towards the last tooth. It's useful, but sometimes you might look at this and go like, is it, or is that more centered? The problem with absolutes like centered or equal or those kinds of things, nothing in nature is absolutely equal or centered. It might be a little off center. So in addenda, though, the cutting edge should be shifted towards the bottom tooth. And in texana, as we will see now next, it would be straight across. Or, sorry, it would be centered in the middle of the segment, the place of point of greatest depth. Well, since we were talking about that, let's just go with this texana specimen right to looking at that. And here we have I'm going to tilt it forward a little bit so we can see that better. I think the mandibles are pretty visible in this one. Let's bring it down. Okay, so I'll take it all the way up. They're closed, and it looks like there is some wear and tear on this specimen. However, in theory, the greatest depth is in the center of this tooth, which looks more or less true, but again, I wouldn't wouldn't take it to the bank. But since we're here at the rim, you can see that there's no little teeth denticulations along the rim on this texana specimen. So that fits Mike's definition as a much better character. If we flip to T2, we will see all black hairs, or hopefully we'll see all black hairs. Between the white bands of the different segments. It might be easier to see. So first of all, you don't see anything other than the white fascia, but often when you're looking at hairs on the top, the scutum, or the abdomen, you really want to look at them from the side, because it's often difficult, and they often have a slight translucence to them to tell what the color is looking straight down with a background of a very dark integument. Other species are much worse than this. So you can see here, here's T2 between this area and this area, and something popped up. And you can see all of these are black. And if you recall, there may have been a few black hairs in there, but basically this is a big ruff of white hair in addenda. So if we look at the rear end, so addenda, again, in comparison, slightly larger. Difficult to go to the bank on that one. Why are we going to the bank with bees? I don't know. But here we have T6 dirty specimen. However, you can see that there is, and these are prone. Here's the upright black hairs, but here are some light colored prone hairs, and almost always texana has some of those in there. So I think that's a good, and you can see the general depressed nature with long hairs in there of the last segment, T6. Relatively big compared to its sisters. So texana, and you'll see in the Discover Life guides that we lump, I believe, addenda, texana, brevis, and mendica all together because they are so closely related and need some time to sort out these various characters, with the penalty being that there's a lot to read. But I always feel that it's better. Oh wait, I'm going to brevis right away, but I don't know that that's next in Mike's key. So let's conform and see where Mike takes us. So, okay, we're finished with those. And if we went back to 31, what was the split? Depressed margins on T3 to T5. Oh, and the convex medial, so that those bumps on the rim, which was in texana, I did not show that to you. And S6, all the hairs were dark. So the alternative universe is we have T3 through 5 margins more or less flat. And we have S6 hairs can be variable, can be pale or dark. Brevis, which is the one we come across the most, is most often light, although depending on who you believe, there are either species or subspecies with all dark, which is certainly true in the South. So now if we jump back down and we take a look here, T6 and S6 hairs. So our split is apical fringe, including apical fringe yellowish or orangish, apical span of mandible very wide compared to the base, and the mandible has 5 teeth. So that takes us into latimanus. Paraherta is essentially a Western latimanus, and in fact, it's really difficult to tell them apart. And Mike goes into some detail there. But for most of the East, you don't really worry about Paraherta. It's once you reach the Dakotas that you might start picking up some of that. But it's murky enough that people don't have a good handle on what the differences are. So let's pull a latimanus, also a monster big species. More northern, and oddly, I got so it doesn't occur here at the lab. We have to go to Western Maryland to pick it up. But oddly, I got a big sample from the 60s that was saved long ago by a collector who just collected a bunch of things and then gave it to, I want to say Riverside, and their museum people, and it was just in cotton. So by being in cotton, it's just like he dried them and put them in layers of cotton, and that was it. But the interesting thing is we have those, we've pinned them up or glued them really. And when we took a look there was a series of latimanus in there and several other species that we at some point will look at those. Since it's waited 50 years, we probably can wait a few more years. Or is it 60? So here, very different. We have S6 all pale, and the central portion is, I can't see here, but I'm going to spin it so you can. The central portion is bare in this group. And then we will look at the, and you can also see it's another one with orangish rather than pale white or off-white hairs. So we're going to look for the central bare area, which a number of Megs have. So this is a common pattern, and there's a whole character in Discover Life that covers that. Not completely obvious, but you can see by looking at the pits. So a lot of times hairs come out of pits on specimens. Here's this fringe that we were talking about, almost always, perhaps always present, light. The base hairs here are also light. There's no black hairs. And this area, if you see underneath or behind these very long pale hairs, this is all bare here. So that fits that apical fringe light, central bare area, basal hairs pattern. Everything is pale. That's a very useful way of splitting out a lot of the species. Okay, now we will go to the mandible area, and we'll see what is usually the case in latimanus, based on my experience, is that usually their mandibles stick out. And part of this is what Mike was talking about in terms of the relatively large size of their mandibles. And you can then usually also see the five-toothed nature, within the limits of it being worn. So here we go. Tooth number 1 would be the outermost one. And Mike, recall, counts from this end forward. It's just a matter of practice. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. With this area here, let's see if we can see that better and zoom in on it. It has a backward pointing sinus. By sinus, I mean a, let's call it a cove. That's the right term. Is that the proper term? In the mandible. Yeah, here we go. So here's this mandible's lapping this one. So I might have had it even backwards last time. 1, 2, 3, and here's the sinus that's pointing rearward. That makes it, I think, relatively easy to detect 4, 5, or notice this specimen. So Mike talks about, if you look in the guide, he talks about, I'm going to bring it back to there, that he says it's easy to interpret as 4 teeth. So when he is talking about the mandible, he says the apical span is 1.5 times the width of the mandible at base. So we have to kind of figure out what is what here. So the apical span, remember, he often flips these wide open. So this looks like a lateral span, but it's only lateral when it's closed, right? So when it's open, it becomes the apical. So towards the tip would always be apical, but you could argue what was what. So it's this distance here, there to there, and then we're going to go all the way, not this area, but all the way to the very base where it articulates against the side of the face. Let's see if I can pull that up pretty easily. Spin it. Spin it like a piano. And there is the base. So we don't have that direct comparison. You have to do this when you're looking at it. So this here to here would be the base. So that's what he means by the base, where it joins, and there's big muscle here, and then there's these condyles, which are sort of hinge areas on either side that allows the mandible to open and close. So this is so the other way to talk about this is that it's got quite a wide mandible. It projects out from the face quite a distance in comparison to the base. It's not obvious in terms of, like, you have to be conscious of looking for that, but it's once you look it up, it's noticeable. So we're back here. So we've looked this one up. So there's more information about paraherta in here. And then the contrast is T6 and T5 with at least some dark hairs. It can be all dark too. S6, narrow apical fringe, always dark. Okay, and yep, that's an apical span of mandible about equal to basal area, and mandible with 4 teeth. Brevis. So as Mike notes there, it's widespread, and there appear to be something between species and color forms involved there when you go up to the prairies and then go down to the deep south. Those have been named a couple different ways. We're going to ignore the names, one of which is Onabrictus. I think that's the upper Midwest one. And then I'm forgetting what the southern one name is. So first of all, the brevis is nearly half the size of latimanus, so you wouldn't not notice that in any kind of collection. So we'll go to S6, and he
Tim
also
says
mentions
pseudobrevis.
T6. Pseudobrevis, that's right. Very imaginative people out there. I hear the murder hornet was renamed the northern giant hornet, which just strikes me as completely lacking any imagination. Okay, I get it why you wouldn't call it murder hornet, but come on, can't we do better than northern giant? Or play it way too safe. Okay. Remind me, the bird people, northern oriole instead of Baltimore oriole. Good grief. Okay, so here we are. This is sort of the standard brevis, which has we're looking underneath, scopal hairs, S6, white hairs in the basal part, no shiny bare area in the middle, apical fringe dark. So in other species groups, it can be, and this whole segment can be entirely dark, or the amount of pale hairs can be much less and maybe just along the base, like you might get in mendica, but in a reverse sort of way, because mendica, well, would have orange hairs, I guess would be one of the big differences. But recall mendica's profile of T6 is very straight. Just dump the specimen back under here and you'll see that the profile here is very concave, almost lip-like at the end. So that's quite different. Also, the hairs are standing up, as was mentioned earlier in an earlier couplet. We look now in terms of differentiating from latimanus. really size will do it all. But if we look at the mandibles, so this is a good example specimen. So first of all, let's just look at those wings. So when you see wings like that, the whole ends are basically chewed off. They've lost maybe at least a quarter, maybe a third almost. And so this is a very old bee. It's led a rough life and the tips are shredding from hitting the ground and going in and out of nests and things. And also they have been doing a lot of making nests with their mandibles, and now their mandibles are also quite dull. And when we look at them, in fact, so dull are they that it's really difficult to tell whether there's a cutting edge there or not any longer, because it's just worn off. So you might have looked at the specimen and said, oh, no cutting edges, and then you're completely off in a different category of bee. So beware. And if it's ambiguous or you have a worn specimen, some of these things that have to do with mandibles, you might want to not click on and discover life and use other characters and see if you get towards an answer that you can parse later. So, but we still can see 1, 2, 3, 4, no sinus or anything or signs of it. They don't wear that much, quite different. And then if we take this distance, which would be the apical end, and we compare it to the base, it's more equal. I still think it's a little bit larger along the apical edge. Mike is more of the notion that it is the same. Well, again, we are not in a good position to do a direct comparison because I had to turn it, and then I'm changing that magnification. In fact, I can't even see the base right now, so I'm going to turn it some more here, recenter it. It's the specimen. I think it's off the end. There we go. Ooh, I really do need to spin it. And where the mandible would be. Okay, there is the mandible base sticking out, but you can't see the apical end because it's twisted and at right angles. However, if you were using your fingers, you could compare mandible base here to here, muscle attachment, condyle, that distance to what's the apical thing, and it's more or less equal. However, again, big versus small, 4 versus 5 really will do the trick. What do we got for time there, Claire?
15 minutes.
Okay.
Give or take.
All right. Well, I think we can do it. Okay. So when we go from here, so sadly, I don't have Integra, even though I see it every once in a while. Mike says there's a SAN obligate. I can't recall on the ones that I have here. So again, we have a clipial margin tooth or denticulate, and it's comparing the hind basotarsus. So in this one, it's very broad. So it's, I believe, yeah, with nearly half the length of that thing. And in contrast, and we're going down here to frigida and ingenua. So ingenua is very rare, and I don't have any specimens of that. And I think I've maybe only keyed out one in my life. It seems to have S6 hairs dark, so I can't speak or show that one very much. But frigida, we do have a more northern frigid, I guess, so speaking to that. So if we look here, mandible with 4 teeth, mandible over 5 teeth are going to separate out these two groups. We really only have frigida to look at, and when we do, and also the difference here is that the hind basal tarsi is not short and broad like it is in Integra, but longer. So frigida, we have a couplet in frigida versus Integra in the Discover Life Guides. So when we look at that, I'm going to pull, just thinking about my time here, frigida specimen. Now, Mike says here S6 all pale, but you'll see that in my specimen, which I'm pretty confident of, and again, might be a difference between geographically, we're going to put the specimen under the scope and bring it down magnification. And we're going to look at S6 here. You'll see it is pale, but the fringe is dark in my specimen. I only have one, and from New York City, as oddly. I have a bunch of males. All right. Get the magnification and focus done, and we'll move a little bit closer so you can see this. So what you're seeing is a lot of dark integument. It is complete. There's no central bare spot, but these hairs are pale, but the fringe hairs, it's not showing completely well here, are dark. Mike said all pale, but in mine, the fringe hairs are dark. It's a bit of a fluffy specimen. There's not a lot of white banding on the abdomen. Not a great specimen either. Here, I think Mike mentions that also. Let's see if there's anything else to add here. So it would have 4 teeth, which we're not going to look at for, you've seen 4 teeth before. And we have the basotarsus is longer. We don't actually need to measure that one here either. I think we're getting through and have a good sense of a lot of these things. So it's a lot of the same kinds of characters. It's relatively large, but not monster big. So it's bigger than mendica, smaller than latimanus. I'll put that away. And then we're going to get to these last two 5-toothed specimens. Centuncularis is a European species that made its way over here, maybe 40 years or so ago. It's relatively common, but my impression is mostly it's common in city areas. And relativa can be almost everywhere, including in city areas. So a lot of times they co-occur. Let me pull those specimens.
Is relativa also European, or is that from around here?
Nope, relativa is native. And so we're going to be looking at the hair color and size. If we have time, we'll look at the mandibles, but they're 5-toothed. So, but if we look here, and you'll see T6 with some dark hairs, but predominantly orangish ones, and T6 hairs all dark as the main malus apically accumulate. Gosh, I'm not even sure what a malus is. Can someone help me out there? It's not a character I'm used to, but we'll show laterally here with a relativa that there are a lot of pale hairs at the tip, and they're standing up. They stand up in both of them. So these are, again, matching that description of long hairs on T6. And both have this sort of orangish cast. But you'll see here, there are pale hairs there. We're going to, I think both of them have, I believe, all pales on S6 with the central bare area. Let's flip now from relativa to centuncularis. I think also centuncularis has a bit more of an amber overtone. if we want to get into those subtleties to the specimen. So we're looking at S6 again, and indeed, they're all dark hairs. So otherwise, they look almost identical. It's relatively hard to tell them apart on other characters, but that's a pretty straightforward one. The difference in the males is another story, which we will get to 2 weeks from now. Well, not to these per se, but we'll claw our way through Megachile. And I think that's it. So yeah, dark hairs, light hairs versus dark hairs. Anyone figure out what a malus is? Apically acuminate.
I remember Rob Jean using it in class, and I'm looking through my notes right now.
Okay.
But I didn't see anything on the B glossary big thing.
So
Yeah, we
acuminate.
clearly don't use that term very much.
Right. Well, we also don't use acuminate and mucronate. So acuminate might mean arrowhead shaped or tipped, perhaps arrowhead tipped. I don't know. That's mysterious. I want to, malice. Might be something on the face. Okay, so no one seems to know what that is, but you saw these other hairs are great.
Wait. Jean's in for the save. The tibial spur of the front leg consists of a main axis or malus and thin plate-like scraper or velum directed toward the main axis of the leg. Oh, it was him talking about the antenna scraper thing. Yeah, per Michener 2007. Thanks, Jean. Always in it.
All right, so let's look at the relativa and see if we can see that. Centuncularis. So because I don't know what mucronate is, but it strikes me as that it looks more different than acuminate. Yeah.
It's Matt. Mucronate, as I say, is used a lot in botany. So it's like a spine tip. Like the red oak groups have the spine tip lobes. So
so it's like it's pointed versus blunt.
Yeah, acuminate into some sort of a CT or really spine tipped process.
Okay. Oh, spine tipped. All right.
Think a red oak leaf versus white oak leaf, where the lobe on red oaks has that.
Yeah.
Really spinal. Yep, that would be what you're looking for.
So that would be mucronate.
Right.
Acuminate. And so acuminate is what?
Acuminate would be tapering to a long tip, but not with an actual spine tip.
Oh, okay.
Just a narrow terminus.
Okay, I think we are closing in on an actual spot. This may take too much time. Okay, there. I believe this is the foretibia, and that's probably the place we are talking about, but we need to see the tip. So very carefully. That's not something we look at that much, but maybe Mike does. But it hasn't come up in his keys 4, if I recall. Or is that that might be the mid-tarsal segment. I'm not sure. Because I don't see. All right, this is a terrible specimen. I'm going to do a different specimen, and that's it. We'll all have to do our homework looking for our mucronations. And Matt, you wanted to come out to the lab if I saw a quick note, but I'm heading out. So are you talking about later in the year? What's good for you?
Yeah, whenever you get back, just
okay.
We can set something.
We got to get it on the calendar. I should be, I'm relatively available after the trip. So you got some good specimens?
Sam, I think that we should talk about that offline because we might be going out to the Leetown stuff.
Oh, okay.
That's a separate conversation.
I got it. All right. I'm zeroing in here, which I hope is a foretibia, and I'm not sure it is. I don't know. I think this is something that I'll have to do. Well, I'll have to do homework on because I'm not even sure that again is the foretibia, although it looks like, where's the antennal scraper? Let's look on this. Now I'm just curious. Microscopes are amazing. All right. Yep. All right. I'm not going to try anymore. So, any questions?
Nothing in the chat right now. You're welcome to unmute. Okay, well, maybe next time we'll ask Mike to show that at the very beginning.
Okay, right.
I'll put a note in my notes for that. So we're gonna move on to males next time, or did you want to do the like kind of wrap up thing like we talked about before? But let's do that at the end of doing males and females.
I can't remember that conversation. I'm open, so we could just
okay. I think a little while back we had talked about doing kind of like a wrap up after each of these like big genus theories to do like you know, if anybody else has their own like kind of little quick guides or just like holistic questions about what was going on. And
well, let's maybe we'll start the conversation with next time, which hopefully Mike can attend and people can bring show and tell. You know, talk about some things that they've struggled with, have some questions like I can't tell this from that, or I'm having a hard time seeing this, or I have a great additional guide, or I find this paper useful. Those all I think are big contributions because, you know, one size doesn't fit all. That's really why it's such a blessing to have Mike's keys and then to also have Discover Life keys there. And I think something more and more we're going to push is to try and create more of that kind of thing for the larger community of people in North America, which is some kind of unified identification guide system with both, I think both a dichotomous system and a, you know, Discover Life-like thing.
Yeah.
Because so there's just too much struggle.
We can try that kind of like as a discussion style session next time, and we'll try it out. And if it is a flop, then we don't ever have to do it again. And if it's good, then we can do whatever we want. We are making this up as we go along.
Right. Okay. I like that. And I'll see people in a couple weeks.
Yeah. Stay tuned, everybody.
Bye.